my good friend here, Russ.
Alright, so tonight we have, as you probably have read, which is why you're here, officially, it's a nice long title, How to Become a Successful Game Developer with Flash. We have Ross Przybylski, if you were wondering what was his name, who's going to show us how he built his game. This is in two parts. The first part is sort of a higher level overview of how it works, and then going deeper into the random code.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm going to give the floor to Ross, and watch it.
All right, let's get this started. Good night, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ross Przybylski. Just giving background about myself. I am the director of Flash development for Reflection Software. We're an e-learning company based out of Aurora. We develop interactive learning content using Adobe Flash Professional, and we also design and develop a learning management system that connects to these modules and allows administrators to assign coursework to students. If one job wasn't enough for the Flash developer, I've actually got a couple more. I am the manager of D20 Studios, LLC. It's an independent game company. I'm the owner and sole employee currently. We have one product, our flagship product called Hero Mages, which I will be discussing tonight. And I'm also one of the game developer influencers for Adobe. All my contact information is here, so if you have questions after, we don't have a chance to meet and talk in person, please feel free to contact me via Twitter, shoot me an email, or if you're looking for more detailed information and tutorials, please feel welcome to check out my blog, indieflashblog.com. I will be posting these videos to the website sometime later this week after I've had a chance to compile them, so if you missed anything or would like to review, all these materials will be available there for you. So for this first part of the presentation, I have two goals. The first part is to share how I made the transition from a simple game hobbyist, game enthusiast, to become a successful actual game developer using Adobe Flash to develop a game. And the second part of this is that I'm going to explain some challenges I encountered during that process and how I overcame building a game engine, developing artificial intelligence for the game, and porting the game to mobile devices such as Android and iOS. So, let's start at the beginning here. It started as a dream to become a game designer. I've been a long-term fan of tabletop strategy games, Dungeons & Dragons, Warhammer, if anyone's familiar, it's a tabletop game played with vast armies of miniatures. And you get to look like a real cool geek here, commanding your general table and shuffling pieces on a board, rolling lots of dice. It's good fun. If anyone has ever heard of that, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And so one of the things that I encountered growing up, buying a house, starting a family, was that there was less and less time to get together with friends and play a game that had a 80-page rulebook, set up our pieces of miniatures on the basement board and try to slug it out in a short time span during the evening. And so the motivation for why I created this game was to simply have something fun and cool to play with my friends that didn't take a lot of time. And also that would simplify the rule set in a way that any new players that might come on board that, say, aren't familiar with the 80-page rulebook could jump in and play games with us. And so it started off as a board game using many of the figurines and pieces I had available in my collection. And what we essentially did, a friend of mine would come over and I would say, all right, here's some ideas, let's play test this game. And we would go through together and fight each other in this dungeon. And initially, the game started as a cooperative dungeon crawl. So imagine D&D without a game master. And we would be going through and fighting these monsters, trying to get the treasure of the state. And during this process of prototyping, we discovered that we inevitably would both want the treasure, and in an attempt to get it first, we would start slaughtering each other's characters. And so a game that was initially designed to be cooperative, in fact, became more fun as a head-to-head versus game. And so the design of the game shifted from being a more immersive, larger scale monster war into a much smaller, streamlined set of rules. The board got smaller. You see here, this is actually a Mage Knight 3D dungeon, a product no longer manufactured, but that used to be used for the Mage Knight figurines. And we use this as a prototype board. These are actually some of the cards I printed out for the game. And so as the game progressed, I started seeing that this is something that is becoming quite fun, and something I thought that I was investing enough time into that I thought this could be something that I could sell. And so the next step from doing this prototyping as I got the game more refined was to start play testing it in public areas with people who weren't familiar with the game mechanics, and kind of gauge players' reactions to see what they thought of it and what could be improved. So I would literally take the game to my hobby store where I bought the supplies to build it with and said, "You got a minute? Would you like to take a time to play a demo game?" And we'd set it up and play demo games. I started visiting other stores, play testing it with customers there, and eventually I actually submitted the game to a company in Aurora that reviews toys and board games called Retmire to get a professional opinion of the game and the rule set, and get feedback on what they thought could help me improve the game. And much to my delight, the responses from this initial marketing analysis was that the game was very entertaining, fun to play, very simple rules, but, and this is the big but that kind of squashed on my whole excitement, is that, well, you see here you have a lot of borrowed components. For example, this big old thing in the middle is a very pricey component. It's borrowed from another game. Miniatures are obviously very expensive to produce. You've got dice and cards, and it's also a very saturated market, something that's not easy to penetrate into a very already crowded market sector, and that is also a difficult type of marketing to get into in general. Board games are much harder to break into. They're not high-selling units like computer games are, so you have to have a product that's more unique and offers something that's more marketable gaming person. And so they said, your options are maybe either look at the game, change the theme, revise it, make it simpler, or self-publish. And my initial response to that was, well, self-publish. I don't think I can afford the cost of producing and manufacturing this, so what can I do next? And that's where a friend of mine stepped in and suggested, you've been a long-time Flash developer for your work. Why not take those skills and apply them toward making an online-based game? Obviously, the benefits are, take it to the web, you can distribute it very easily by just copying it to the web, and people can upload it, and there's no need to worry about distributing physical products. And I said, well, that's a very good idea, but I've never built a game before. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Take this forward a few years, and now we are here. Hero Mages has become a multi-platform game. It is available for web browser, Android, iOS, and is playable on both large desktop screens as well as the smaller mobile phone devices. And so just as a quick demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and close this down and just fire it up to show you how this works. So any player can come onto the website here, and is presented by a very nice Play Now button, and can simply click on this to launch the game. And this is all running in Adobe Flash. What's cool about this is if I maximize my screen here, the interface will actually expand and adapt to take up the whole thing. I don't know why that fire's still there, but if I just log in. And right here I've got my iPad already signed into a game, and we're just going to go ahead and log in here and show you how to join this game. So here, this is the main chat lobby where users will connect. And here inside the game I can customize my options. My iPad is actually the host, so the same similar kind of layout is here, and I can change things like the map, for example. If I want to fight on the fire pit, I can change it. Now I can see the update on this screen here. If I want to pick different characters, you can select them inside of this box, and so forth. And now we'll just go ahead and start the game. Just real quick to show you how this connectivity works. So this is a live multiplayer game. It's cross-platform, so you can actually play it on an iPad or Android device and play against other mobile devices or against other computers. There's no restriction in which device you use to actually play the game. And it looks like it's my turn here. So on my iPad, I can actually command my forces, and you'll see those updates take place on the opponent's screen. So it's a turn-based game. It plays very similar to the board game. Essentially, it's a direct port. All of the elements of the board game that you saw in the previous screenshot are represented here. Walls, miniatures, cards, and let's say for fun's sake, I'm going to attack my own guy. I have the dice rolls turned on. But normally there would be a nice set of dice chugging across the screen as well. And maybe I want to play a card and summon a monster. So that's kind of how the gameplay works. I would then pass turn over, and now I can take my turn on the other side here. So just a quick demonstration there. So where has this got me? The game has now achieved quite a bit of success. Since its launch in July of 2009, I've accrued a community base of over 10,000 registered players. It has over 10,000 downloads across the mobile marketplaces. It's won multiple awards for technical excellence. It was a finalist for Best Mobile Game, and it's been recognized by Apple as a new and noteworthy game. It's also within the Adobe Gaming Showcase. So tonight what I'm going to share with you are essentially what I consider my 3 steps towards success. And despite all the different challenges I encountered, these simple 3 things are what carried me through the entire process. So number 1, choose the right tools for the job. And this is where the magic of Flash really came into play, because before that I had an awesome idea, but no way to distribute it effectively to customers as an independent developer. Step 2 is to focus on one challenge at a time. When I began the challenge of creating this game and was presented with the idea by my friend, the initial thoughts that flooded my head are, think of all the things I'd have to do or know to be able to build this game. I mean, even if I could figure out somehow how to build the game engine and get these things working on screen, I've never done any kind of multiplayer connectivity before, and the game thrives and depends on the multiplayer component. So how am I going to get players connecting to each other with multiple Flash clients across the world? And as you think about these things, you become overwhelmed and say to yourself, oh, this is something that's out of my realm. I need to have somebody else figure out how to do that, or I need some special training to do it. Okay, but if you focus on just one step at a time, you discover that these limitations become just background noise, and that you can accomplish goals in piecemeal. And the third step, very important for anyone that undertakes this task, is to never give up. Because success is not something that happens overnight. It takes a long period of time, and unless you're one of the very few lucky examples that everyone likes to cite as, oh, look at this, Angry Birds is just popular overnight, or it's downloaded by all these people. There is, for every one Angry Birds that's out there, there's thousands of other games that are barely making it, or never seen, or never in the spotlight at all. So to get this far as an independent developer is actually a pretty exciting accomplishment. And you want to make sure to persist and stick with it. So let's talk about the first part, the tool set. And we'll talk for a moment about why I decided to use Adobe Flash Professional amongst some of the other options I had available at the time, such as JavaScript, or PHP-based games, or a form-based game, for example. And so we'll talk about a few of the reasons here. So for one, the tool set itself, Flash Professional, offers something unique that other tool sets simply can't offer. And that is, it's both a coding environment and a visual design development. And so what's great about this is it exercises both the right and left brain. As a game designer, it's very hard to be completely abstract. You need visuals to display, lay out your ideas, and portray your examples in a way that makes sense both to you and the end user. Flash provides an amazing tool for laying out interfaces, designing animations, and building these assets that are required for any type of game. The second part is that it has an excellent coding environment built into it that allows you to seamlessly tie assets you create within the IDE with actual code classes to control them within the game. It uses object-oriented language, there's a strong code base to it, and there's simply put a lot you can do with the coding environment within the tools. This is an example of a developer-artist workflow. So when I took on the task of creating the game and pulling in these artwork assets, I'm a designer. I do some graphics, but I'm mostly a developer. So artwork is not my strong point. I can't draw, say, really beautiful rendered artwork or model animations. So I outsourced this and looked for freelancers to assist with that. And the way we communicated back and forth our objectives and goals for the design of the game was by using Flash Professional. So artists were tasked with following a specifications list that I would provide saying, all right, I need 20 models. They need to have these animations, and these animations should last X many frames. These specifications would go out to the artists. They would interpret those, we'd have a talk about it, and then they would come back and deliver assets directly built within the Flash IDE. I could then take and open up these assets, scrub through the timelines and make sure everything looked right, and also manipulate these assets. So if I found a particular animation might need a tweak here and there, I can make those adjustments myself. So it was a very effective workflow in being able to tie in both the artistry and the design and development all within the same tool set versus having to import something that was a third-party app. Having everything contained within one development platform was very effective for the process. Number two, aside from the tool set, the other strength of Flash is simply put the runtime. And the Flash runtime is effective. Everyone well knows it for the browser. It has a massive penetration rate of 98% of computers have Flash Player installed on it. So from a customer perspective, I'm thinking, I want to have my game out to as many people as possible. How can I do that? And looking at the choices, do I want a Java applet? Do I want to make sure they have the latest version of IE9 that supports HTML5? Or do I want to go with something I know is going to work across most computers, which is Flash? The other part that's a little bit less known is that Flash actually exports to everything. And so not only can you target the web browser, but you can export applications directly to iOS, Android, BlackBerry, all from a common code base. And so today we'll also be talking about how I was able to do this using the tool set and what's involved in creating an Adobe Air application that will run on Android and iOS devices. And so this brings us back to the amazing screenshot here of all devices running upon that same base source code and operating on all platforms. All right, on to step two, that everything begins by taking the first step. So the quote I like to say here is that an impossible task becomes possible when you break it up into smaller, manageable tasks. So we're going to look at 3 examples now of how I apply this rule set to the game development process and how breaking the steps down to a simple 3-step process for each of these elements of the design process allowed me to achieve what I was able to create in the game. And so the first part is creating the game engine. Now this is a screenshot from the gameplay. You've got some slick animations here with the surfers blasting lightning bolts at your units here. And again, looking at the onset of this and seeing my vision of the future, I'm thinking, yeah, it'd be great to have all these animations, but what does it look like in the beginning process? What did I actually have to start with to get to this point and get past that barrier of this is too much for one man to build? So here's a screenshot of what my first Pyramid engine looked like. Not so impressive. You see a grid here, and you see these brightly colored circles, and so the way I approached the game engine construction was rather than think about things like units, models, animations, is to start with the core task. What does the engine need to accomplish in order for the game to be playable? And the answer to that question from the board game perspective was, well, essentially you have pieces that are represented on a game board, hence the grid, that are shuffled on the board, representing tactical decisions of the players, and that also have to take into account obstacles such as walls and visibility of other units. And so the very first step I took to building this game was a very simple engine that consisted of a two-dimensional array and the ability to create some simple structures. These circles represented units. Each was assigned some basic stats, a life stat, a move stat, an attack stat, that were then thrown into this core engine and essentially writing algorithms to control the movement of these pieces and also figure out line of sight. So one of the early aspects of this engine was that you could draw the walls onto the board to create different situations where you might have visibility blocked from, say, these guys over here to the red guy. Now you need to get to the red guy. So what does my algorithm look like for, maneuvering around these walls and getting to that guy so I can attack? And so all the model did was essentially calculate and highlight spaces so that I could test from a development standpoint, is the engine appropriately detecting the rules and logic of the game? Is it counting the number of spaces correctly? Is it highlighting the field of vision correctly? After that process, the next step was to add an animation. So I started saying, okay, well, instead of simply showing it, why not tween those circles? So the next phase of the engine would involve adding animations where instead of simply having the circle appear there, it would shuffle and move, and you'd actually see some movement animation. And as it developed, it eventually became a prototype engine where I put in screenshots of actual models and had those move in place, and then built upon those animations, built the dice rolling animations, and after a few weeks go by, you add one piece at a time, and suddenly you get back to something that looks more like this. And so that's the process of taking one step at a time. Instead of thinking about the final picture, just look at the small goals and objectives along the way and do one piece at a time. Artificial intelligence. I'm sure this is a topic that will excite a lot of interest amongst you. So for those who aren't familiar with the amazing display of battle and destruction here, this is a screenshot from Blizzard's StarCraft 2. This game has perhaps one of the most brutal AIs I've ever encountered in a game. And what makes it unique in particular is that with strategy games versus, say, a first-person shooter, the computer's thought process involves a lot more into the gameplay. It's not just one guy coming at you with a gun, it's an entire army being coordinated in an orchestrated fashion that hits you at the bone level that just excites anger and excitement at the same time. So here they are commanding a massive army and destroying these guys here. And so invariably, when I came to the part of my game development process where I started to look at AI, I looked at a screenshot like this, and the instant feeling I have is, whoa, this is way too much for a one-man guy. They must have teams of like the most dedicated expert professionals. How the heck could you ever possibly get past the barrier of developing something like this within a game? Going back to my process of the one step at a time, I decided, okay, well, we need to find some articles that are help me with this. And so initially, I started my search on Google, a good place to begin any game development search. How to build AI. And the very first articles I come up with are algorithms, technical terms for things that I've never heard of before. It's actually a funny story. When I was in college, I actually took an AI course. It was one of the courses I was most excited about taking as a student, and I dropped out of it after the second week because it was just way over my head, and I had all this other stuff going on. And so this whole process and these articles I was reading really kind of frightened me, and it intimidated me to think that this is something that I just kind of have to hire someone or have a miracle hit me. And it wasn't until I stumbled on this great article on GameDev.net, I believe, that broke it down. Instead of talking about the coding and mechanics, it simply described a process. I believe the article is called Project AI, and I do have a link to it on my postmortem article, which I can share later with you. And what this article did that was kind of different from the other technical pieces was instead of talking in terms of code, it talked about the AI as a process, and it really broke it down in a way that I could understand and relate to it, and it made the process of this massive confusion seem a lot less intimidating so that I, as a single developer, could approach it. So, AI, one step at a time, what does this look like? The terminators in the background there are to symbolize, again, the onslaught of, taking one step. All right, so the way to look at AI, and this is what allowed me to get past the blockade of confusion in the beginning there. is that AI is merely a decision-making tool. It's not this crazy killer robot that's going to take over your brain and command the future. It's just a tool set. Like any other piece of code, it has a function. And the basic functions of AI are the following three things. It identifies a list of available choices within a set of game decision-making choices. It ranks those choices according to priorities of most important to least important, and then it executes the highest ranked decision. That's all that AI does. So if you're looking back at Star Wars over here and are thinking to yourself, there is just too much going on here, just remember that the core of this process is being run by those three basic principles. These units are getting a decision-making process, and they're generating a list of what actions they can actually perform. I can build buildings, I can create units, I can send them out in a tab. It's using an algorithm to rank those choices, and then it's simply executing the highest ranking decision to carry out those orders. So where did this take me? What Here Mages players are now saying about the AI, after being a person that had no clue what to do and was entirely intimidated. That AI is brutal! I've been playing this for days without being able to win a single battle. Is it me, or is this game seriously skewed in difficulty to impossible? And I look back at this and I laugh to myself because I'm thinking, man, I was hoping at best to have a zombie AI that could shuffle along the board and maybe present some facsimile of a challenge to players, and now I'm being told and even getting one-star reviews because the game is too hard to play. And so it's just, again, another example of how just by changing the way you look at the problem can really shift your angle and help you pass those barriers. And so I like to use this slide a lot. It's one of my favorite slides in the presentation because it's got this cool schematic background. So I went ahead and created another one that kind of clears it out. So what this is a flow chart that I use to map out the decision-making process that goes into playing a game. And so when I approach the problem of AI, I'm considering those three variables that I mentioned earlier. And I'm thinking like how a player would think. What are the first things that a player in this game is going to do when they initially start the game? And I consider the most important priority is your main character. And Hero Mages is all about your mage because that's your queen in chess. It's your most powerful piece. It's responsible for all your power in the game. So the first thing they actually look at is my mage alive? If it is, probably should protect it. If it's not, then I should carry on. So after you complete this first project objective, you go down to your next task. And so essentially, the game engine is already responsible and aware of what choices you can make. Because in order to have a multiplayer game that allows the player to carry out commands, the engine has to be aware of, well, what can the player do? So there's a list of actions that is obviously generated by that interface, and I figured, well, why couldn't the AI use this exact same list of instructions to determine what its choice pool would be? And so that's the step two. What are the choices I can have? Simply build that list. And then the more difficult task, part three, is how do I rank those choices? And so the computer will go through these different processes in a series of functions and then look at the available choice that it has available to it and then analyze and assess the outcome of those decisions based on probability. So let's say it gets down to, do my instant healing? Okay, well, first it checks its life force of the heroes. Does this guy have full health? No, it doesn't. Really easy to check that by just scanning through the list of characters in the AI's team. If it does, do I have healing actions available? Again, we have our pool of choices using the same exact engine we use to gather the player's choices. So we go through that list. Is there a healing action? Oh, why? Yes, there is. Well, then I think I will go ahead and heal those units and then carry on to my next objective. And so essentially the AI just goes through this basic process, thinking similar to how a regular player would think, and then looks at its choices based on probable cause and effect. If it's looking to make an attack, since the game uses dice to calculate battles, it'll scan through what possible targets it has, again using the same mechanisms that I use to control player attacks, and then prioritize the best possible attacks based on the most probable outcome of success. And that's how it ranks the choices. And then the last step of that process is, well, execute the best choice, because that's the one that I should go with. And that's how the AI works. All right. Multi-screen design. So the next major task, from taking it to a browser-based game to a mobile place, was how do I get this game not only to perform and run well on multiple screens, but also be playable? Because there's a large disparity between full screen desktop you see here and a tiny little phone with maybe a 4:3 screen you see here. How do you approach the challenge of designing an interface that can adapt itself to be playable on both devices? Once again, look at the problem as small steps. So in this case, what I did to develop a multi-screen app was consider a 3-tier multi-screen design. In order for an interface to be able to adapt, it has to position itself in a way that is effective on a smaller screen device. So you know that your game is going to have certain components that are used to interact with it. Buttons to issue commands, selectable characters, things like that. And so the way I looked at it was, let's start with a series of smart, low-level components. What if my basic components, like my buttons and my UI, were smart enough to know how to shrink and scale themselves down effectively so that when I put them on a small screen, they're both functional to the player, visible and usable. Part 2 is take mid-level clusters and group those smaller components together so the job of handling that collapsing of components to a smaller screen is automated for me. Don't think of the problem as, I want to take this big screen and make it a small screen as a one-shot deal. Think of it as a bunch of smaller problems. I've got this set of buttons at the top here that needs to somehow correlate down to a smaller screen. How can I get buttons up at the top down to the smaller screen? And then build small programs that handle these tasks for you. And in this way of thinking, you start to realize that the computer can do a lot of work for you. You can build smaller programs that handle the task of managing these resources and then allow your program to do some of the intelligent scaling for you. And then the last level is, of course, the screen level intelligence. And this is where you consider things like your pixel area, your aspect ratio, and your DPI to build effective layouts that allow you to display what components of the interface are effective for that size screen. So what I'll show here is just a couple of examples of screens. This here is an example of a web-based interface. And this down here is an example of the mobile interface. And immediately you'll see some key differences. On a larger screen, you have access to much more screen real estate. The screen's bigger, so you can fit more detail, and the detail can be a lot more compartmentalized. On a smaller mobile screen device, your resolution may be the same. So, for example, I might have an 800 by 600 display on my desktop, and maybe my Android has an 800 by 480. So if you actually look at those side by side on the desktop, your actual screen area is the same. But remember, on a mobile device, you're looking at a 4-inch screen versus a 13-inch screen. And so the ability to press and interact with those buttons is a lot different on the smaller screen. So some of the challenges in converting these over was to look at how the interface was designed and design effective handling systems so that information that maybe is not necessarily needed at a given point in the game could be hidden and accessed through other functions. And so what I'll show you now is a walkthrough of some of these screens, giving you an idea of how I went through this design process and created these different layouts. So this is a blow-up of the first web browser and the tablet UI. And this is what you would see if you had the ideal large screen display. You've got your 2 panels, you've got your units command at the top here. This is your list of players participating in the game, whose turn it is, your list of cards and special abilities, your main action screen where you see your dice rolls, your game board where your units are located, and your command interface pane for the units themselves. So you issue orders to individual participants in the game. Taking this to an iPad, iPads are great. They have a large screen reality as well, but they're not widescreen. And so you have limitations with how much information you can portray. So notice that most of the layout you see here is the same, but what I did differently was collapse that second pane and kind of group things together along the side here, because you have more vertical space with a square aspect ratio versus a more rectangular aspect on a wider screen display. And finally, on the mobile UI, we collapse that pane entirely and just have one section at a time. So depending upon whether you're commanding a unit, looking at player statistics within the game, or going through and viewing different statistics, the panels will actually collapse. And notice also that the buttons here are much larger on screen than they were in those previous interfaces. And this is because when you shrink this down to a small screen, those buttons may only be half-inch thick. And so you want to make sure that the buttons are small or big enough that a typical human finger can press those. Okay, so we'll talk some more about the multi-screen development and the process behind it in the second part of the presentation. I'm actually going to take you guys through a walkthrough demonstration with actual code examples. I will make sure it's high level enough that if you're not necessarily familiar with the extra code, that you'll be able to follow it. It's more geared for just understanding the basic principles of a multi-screen design layout and what goes into it. The code's less important because the skill set you use to design these interfaces will actually carry over whether you do it in HTML5, Java, or ActionScript. So it's, again, about the problem-solving process of taking that three-level approach toward creating simpler problems and solving those. All right. So this slide, very important. The never give up part of the presentation. So I have lots of stories to share in this regard. The one I choose to use as my example is during the Adobe Air App Challenge, the contest held last November. I was working on developing this multi-screen elements for the game that you saw in the previous slides. And I'm working a full-time job during this, and so my coding is essentially coming home and staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning to get this all done. And my wife is pregnant with our first child during this process. And it's funny because actually one of my coworkers came in that morning to me and says, "Ross, I'll give you one piece of advice. You want to make sure that you're prepared because it's going to happen when you least suspect it. The child's going to come when you least suspect it." I said, "Okay, well that's good advice. I'll think about that. And it just so happens that we still had 6 weeks out until my son was expected to be born, and I had again like no sleep the night before. And of course, water breaks, and before we know it, we're rushing to the hospital, and out comes this little guy here. And it's one of those things that just you think about the process of what goes into making this game. I mean, game development is not just a job or something you do. It's something that takes like a part of your soul, and something that you have to be passionate about and care about. And in order to get through something like that, you have to have just amazing support from both your family, and you have to have a purpose that's higher than the end goal. You're doing this for a reason. You have to have passion and excitement to make it through an experience like that. And so I like to use an example. This is my wife on the side here, and one of the things that she's done to help support this process is to attend these trade shows with me, help market and talk about the game. And so it's very important that throughout this process developing these games that you find something to center yourself so that you can stay true to both your family and your end goal. Sorry, what's that? Yes, exactly. Yeah, and the newest game fan, of course. So, what are some takeaways from this? One, Flash is an awesome tool for creating cross-platform web and mobile games. It's something that enables you to quickly develop both visual and code-based development, and also reach the widest possible audience, not only the web, but also mobile devices. By breaking complex programming tasks into simpler, smaller goal sets, a simple game design hobbyist with a dream can transcend into a gaming industry success. And great games need not be an instant success. They can arise through passion and continual effort. And this third point I'll stress very important because I've done what I consider quite successful in this regard. I've got some notability and people are starting to recognize and really get excited about the game. But there's still a lot that I have to learn. And so it's always a process moving forward that you just got to keep trying it because no one knows what the next big game is going to be or what particular feature you're going to add to your game that's going to make it become the next Angry Bird. So it's important that you be persistent, keep trying, and realize that success is not a marker that's a wall. It's something that you're continuously striving for. It's a mountain you're continuously climbing. So persistence is the key toward reaching. All right. So, any questions at this point? Yes?
What was your total length of time of development?
Total length of time development. Excellent question. All right, so there were different phases, and I'd like to answer this question by breaking up into subsects because there's different parts. But the initial prototype of the game, from board game design, once it was completed as a board game, to the first prototype where it was playable within the browser, was roughly 6 months. And it's important to note that during this time I had no experience, and so it was a learning process combined with actual development. The polishing of that into animating artwork and animations was probably about another year and a half. And then the mobile development was about, well, the initial prototype of the mobile was about 2 weeks for the contest that I was entering. And then another year to polish it and adjust the optimizations for performance. And then after that, the iPad from the iOS, or from the Android version, was only 4 months. Other questions? Yeah.
You said that you hired artists to do the work. Did you have any information in the actual design of those characters, like you wanted to use barbarians or that sort of thing, like you told them the type of characters you wanted?
Yes. So the process for hiring an artist, what I did was, essentially I had a document that outlined all the different characters, what the animations were, and this document also included pictures. So I actually searched Google and looked for artwork that I liked as examples of these characters and kind of gave them a collage and said, here's a list of stuff I like and kind of the direction I'm looking for. Use this as a guide, and then follow these procedures to make sure that it has all the animations I need for it. And then I found the artist by posting onto different artist boards. There's a lot of indie game development boards out there that you can go onto and just kind of say, hey, I'm looking for artists. And here's a description of what the basic job is. I need 20 models, I need to be this type of animation. And within about 4 hours of that, I had like 10 responses. Over the week, I got plenty more, and lots of studios would share their portfolios. And the studio I ultimately chose to go with, called Ore Studios, I picked them because they actually provided an example model and said, here, we're going to actually show you what we can do for you. Sent me an example model and said, yeah, that's totally what I want. So that's other questions? Yeah.
Were there any like Flash animators that proposed to be artists in the process? Did you run into any of those that with animation experience? If so, did that skew your decision making at all? In other words, if you found somebody who had an underlying understanding of Flash, did it show in their artwork they presented as part of a potential project?
So I'm going to try to make sure I understand your question. You're saying if somebody showed me an example of art, of an animation artwork, what would be like the process through which I would go through integrating that artwork into the game?
Well, there's a lot of Flash animators out there who are kind of a lull in their career.
Okay.
Those people are potentially looking for this sort of work. Hey, I can do character animation.
Oh,
doing
the
animation
animator, you prepare themselves for integrating with the game.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent question, yeah. So this is what I like to tell animators, and this is what's a very important piece of advice. I was actually just at North Central, and the focus of that presentation was targeted for artists developing animations within Flash Professional. And the key piece of advice I provided was make sure that you're aware of the technical demands of a game project and the coding side. So one of the challenges that artists have is that they're very good at visualizing their animations and portraying them on timelines, but they don't necessarily have a technical knowledge side of what's involved in integrating that animation into it. Artists that can portray both the creative skill and are willing to work with developers to talk in like technical lingo and also adapt their structure and organization to fit a developer's needs makes you a 10 times more valuable artist. When I looked at and was sampling some of the different artists available, I found a lot that had really good examples of work, but that simply did not have the level of communication and also technical understanding I needed to be able to fit within my particular game project. The artists that I worked with understood both the animating side as well as the action script side one of the requirements I had for the game animations was that they needed to be structured in a way that I could reuse those assets effectively, both from a file size perspective, an optimization perspective, and a reusability perspective. One of the features that the game has is that if a player on one team is using the same character as a player on another team, it has to have a way to identify those characters using like a colorized tunic to show that I'm the red barbarian and my guy over here is the green barbarian. And to do that, there had to be like structured pieces within the animation with code running in it so that the game can detect how to make this barbarian green and this one red. And the artists that I worked with were very cooperative in the communication process. They understood the needs and were able to interject those particular features into the animation so that on my side, my job was easier. I could simply import their work and plug it right into the game engine code and get the results out of it. So having that level of expertise in the coding side with your animation skills is definitely key for getting into the game engine. Yeah.
What about like you have your own server? You build all that yourself as well, all the backend stuff, or?
Excellent question. So the game runs on SmartFox server. It's an XML socket server that's designed specifically to integrate with Flash, Android. I think it also might do iOS as well, and Unity. And essentially, this is a multi-player server. It allows you to connect players via chat rooms and game communities, and also send data objects back and forth. So when two players are playing the game, they essentially connect to this server, and then this server bounces signals back to the Flash clients. And when I send the game object with my turn information over, it basically packages that list of commands into an XML object, sends to the server, then it bounces back to the client on the other side to say, oh, here's what my moves were. And the game engine interprets that code and then responds by portraying the correct animation to showcase what the turn was. Yes?
Is there much of a difference working with that in like Air for mobile versus Flash for the browser?
Absolutely none.
Awesome.
And that's what made the multiplayer asynchronous so awesome. I get to sound cool because I can say, my game runs on all these platforms and it's multiplayer. People go, wow, it's multiplayer? You can actually play an Android versus an iPad and not have any problems? And, yeah, of course. And that's honestly all due to the technical back end of this server because it's all based with Flash code. So once I developed it for the browser, taking that same exact code over to the Android was a piece of cake because it essentially operates the same way. It's just sending XML data back and forth between the client and the server, and Air handles that in the same way as the web browser functions. No difference. Literally the same exact code. Yeah.
Sorry if you already answered this. When you're working on this project part-time, like on your free time, how did you kind of plan a budget around? Did you kind of figure out, like, I think I'm going to make this much, but I'm not sure, and then or was it just kind of like, I don't really care if I make it back because it's super fun?
I'd say probably of those two, the latter.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about my story, it's honestly the case for a lot of indie developers. We don't set out making games to become millionaires. We set out to make games because we have a passion for creating games and we want to create something that's unique and fun for the world. You know? My goal, as I said in the beginning, was to make a game for my friends to play. It was never about becoming a gaming industry expert. It was about just making a fun game. And so one of the things I struggle with a lot and that I'm really trying to learn more about is this business process of how to make a game sustainable. Because once you get that first taste of, wow, I could actually be good at this and make this game, the next question becomes, well, how am I actually going to sustain myself doing this? And so I've learned a lot of lessons about how to market it effectively, what's involved in selling the game, and also how to monetize it. The ultimate model I chose to go with was a freemium model. So I figured, most people don't know what Hearmaze is. I don't want to charge them something up front just to get in the game. So why not make it free, let them play the game, and then if they like it, they can buy on these add-ons. And so I've got a free version of the app that lets you play through the tutorial, and then you can upgrade to get single player against the app. So it's definitely something I'm still struggling with learning. As far as budgeting goes, I would say I was more of a blunderer. I kind of didn't really think about it too well. by the stage where I got to, ready to start distributing it, I sought out legal counsel, and the big step you need to actually get is your accountant to take care of all your money managing assets and things like that. And then I created a budget for what I love Archie cost, so let's say my budget figured out approximately $6,000 for it. And I just paid it all. I said, oh yeah, this is a worthy risk to me, I think I can make back at least that, so let's put that in paper. And then I would kind of bucket tasks with that. Other questions?
How much of a concern is security with it, especially if you're dealing with transactions and people purchasing it?
Good question. Okay, so the financial transaction security, the way I handle that is I use PayPal to control, essentially the game will link to an outside PayPal site. And the reason I like that is I have no liability on the financial part at all. PayPal handles all that securely. And then from the mobile perspective, all the transactions are handled through either Apple Marketplace or Google Marketplace or Amazon. So there's no, I don't actually handle transactions. It just sends back a database signal that says, oh, they purchased this. Let's go ahead and check box the mark in the database that says they own this stuff, and now they've got it. Yes?
Yeah, are kids allowed to play this game? And if so, do you have any security features for the chatting and
Yes,
like that?
okay. So there's two parts to that. There's, first off, when you create your game account, there's a user license agreement. And that's the fun legal document that reads. It says you have to be 18 or have a parent that signifies that you're allowed to play this game and signs off for you. So that's the first part of it. And then in the actual community-based side, there is filters within the server to filter out dirty language and make sure that you can't swear or do things like that. And then there's also a forum system, and so players can communicate on these forums, and I self-moderate that. So if anyone posts anything offensive, which hasn't been a problem to date yet, that I can moderate, take that down, or pursue legal action if necessary. Yes.
So the filters are part of SmartFox server?
Yes. Yeah. SmartFox and I have the same filters built into the game client engine too, so any kind of single-player aspects that might happen before you connect to SmartFox, like creating a username, can also be checked with the client side.
So you're monitoring all the chat going on, or?
I don't monitor the chat going on, no. The server has a built-in filter feature that filters out offensive language.
Does it filter out addresses and let's meet up at so-and-so, or?
It doesn't do anything like that.
Okay, so a kid would be vulnerable on there if they got on.
I suppose it's the same as any kind of online chat room. You have the same kind of risks. And that's, again, why it has the parent certification required as an instance. I haven't encountered anything like that. That's
right.
One thing that's great about this type of game versus more of the action shooter games is that the community that plays turn-based board games is actually very positive and good sportsmen, like I guess, is the kind of typically see. So most games in Pyramid I've seen, it's actually been probably the most rewarding aspect of the game experience is that I'll have older adults from across the world playing with children, and they'll treat each other with the same level of respect as you would treat anyone of your close friends or relatives. Always a good game at the end of each match, which is something I'm really proud to say. And I've actually had the pleasure of participating in games that have been multicultural. So I played a game once that had someone from Brazil, Europe, Australia, and the US all in the same game, and joined together and just saying, this is a great experience. Look at how we're all playing this game and having a good time, and everyone treat each other respectfully. And it was a really cool thing to see come out of this development process.
Is there a target demographic?
I would say the demographic would probably be 13 now. Anyone that enjoys strategy. So younger kids that are into Magic the Gathering or Warhammer, and that's a hobby that's shared from all the way to adulthood. A lot of older adults like to paint cards in terms of also enjoy it.
Was being a multi-platform game always your idea? Like, initially you start out as a board game and then you went to a browser. But did you always have in the back of your mind that I want to be able to play this on my mobile, or I want to be able to play it on my iPad, that sort of thing?
No, actually it wasn't. Initially the goal was just to make it on the browser. And it was, the cool thing about the Flash Toolset was that when they released Air, and then they started talking about, oh, this is going to be able to support Android apps. I immediately thought, this is perfect, because I've already got this game in Flash, and now I can target these multi-platforms and actually start porting over to iOS. So initially, it wasn't the goal, but it certainly helped facilitate that transition.
How easy was it for you to convert it for those platforms?
Like I said, there's about a year's worth of work, mainly for the optimization of the graphics. I had to look at the strategy of how I optimize and render the graphics so they can perform on mobile devices. But all the code base and logic of the game that makes the most difficult task of it ported over perfectly. I didn't have to change anything with the game engine or how the mechanics or computer understood the logic. So mainly just UI elements and performance aspects were all I had to change. Yes.
How did you play test all the different platforms? Did you purchase all of the equipment yourself, or did you seek out assistance?
I have one iPad that I used to test the iOS version. I also have coworkers that have iPhones that I tested on as well. And I have one Android device I tested on to do the I also had access to the Sony tablets during the contest I was involved in. There's two of them. The tablet-like one that's got very similar to iPad, and then they had that dual screen tablet. It's actually got two screens like a Nintendo DS, and so I was able to test that during my development process as well. What's great about Air, since there are thousands of different Android devices out there, and you can't reliably purchase all of them and expect to know, because there's just too many out. I would go bankrupt trying to buy all these devices. That's Adobe's job to figure out. They handle all the back end of making sure it runs on the GPUs and things like that. And from time to time, I do have customers that have call-outs like, oh, this one weird feature is happening on my particular device. And that's kind of just like the mystery of the vendor. Each vendor is going to have some kind of peculiarity that might affect the runtime differently. And in that case, I just submit tickets to Adobe, and they take a look at those, and they've got access to a much wider array, so they can handle that. I just focus on making
Have you given Stage 3D a shot?
I have not yet, but I am looking to use it in my next one.
You want to take a break at this point and go back?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We'll take a short break. Afterwards, we'll pass around our famous fishbowl and